The Atlanta Braves relinquished baseball's best record and first place in the National League East on a 6-game swing out west against a pair of first-place clubs. Then they bounced back to get back on the winning track in a brief stay at Truist Park. But they put that rough road trip behind them with that sweep, and now we're going to see if the Braves can carry that momentum out on the road as they face the New York Mets this weekend. I'm Grant McCauley. He's Chris Willis. This is Battery Power TV. Before we dig into this very busy episode of the show, go ahead, hit that thumbs up button, throw a like on this episode, and make sure you subscribe to the Battery Power channel right here on YouTube and turn on those notifications so you'll get an alert every time we drop a new episode, which comes at you each and every week. Chris, the Braves took it on the chin against the Mariners and more so the Dodgers, but those back-to-back wins over the Red Sox have helped Atlanta at least get back on the right track before they head right back out on the road.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you never want to have a 1-5 road trip, obviously, but to come back home for a brief stay and get 2 wins, I think that's exactly what you needed to do. Hit some home runs in that series too. The pitching's been outstanding as always, and you go back out on the road, right back out on the road for an NL East matchup.
Yeah, it's interesting because you go out west for 2 stops, then you stop in Atlanta briefly, which almost feels like an extension of the road trip, though you do, I guess, get to do your laundry and sleep in your own bed for a couple of days. Then you go right back out on the road to New York before really coming home and having that homestand next week that will begin with the Chicago Cubs, a story that we'll get to much later or perhaps next week. But we have to talk about this road trip first, that 1-5 swing against the Mariners, a series which was very frustrating, and a series, Chris, which ultimately was winnable for the Braves. They got walked off in the first game. They lost a 1-run game in game 2. Then Chris Sale throws another great start, and they pick up the finale, a win there. Go into Los Angeles, and more of the same. Another 1-run loss, then 2 rather lopsided, one-sided affairs, I should say, as the Dodgers finished off a sweep, and that really took the wind out of the Braves' sails, and it ended up knocking them out of first place in the NL East as they're now looking up in the standings at the Phillies after spending exactly 1 day out of first place last season. Suffice it to say, it was one of the most unpleasant weeks for the Braves offense in recent memory. Chris, I don't think too many folks expected all of these struggles that we've seen from many of Atlanta's top hitters, then to have the rest of the lineup go cold. Not the most fortuitous timing.
No, not a great situation to be in. Obviously, didn't really see that situation at all last year that I can remember. Where just everybody seems to be cold. But I think if you're looking for positives to bring out of that road trip, 3 1-run losses. You catch a break, you're 3-3 on the trip. Nobody feels as bad. Still the pitching is pitched really well. I mean, the Bryce Elder start, not excluding that obviously, but
right.
It was one of those trips where you felt like if you could have got a couple of those wins in Seattle, just one more win in Seattle, maybe you feel a little bit different coming out. And the Phillies are playing really well and have gotten off to a great start. And I think that's just adding, a little bit to the angst as well. So, this Braves team's too talented to struggle for an extended period. So, I think it's just a matter of time before they turn it around. But yeah, it's not a good time for the offense to go cold, especially facing those type of pitching staffs that the Mariners and the Dodgers have.
Yeah, and let's throw that in the mix as well. And Michael Harris, I talked to him a couple of days ago, said, look, I mean, we know we're fighting it, but we've also faced some really good pitchers. I mean, the Seattle Mariners staff, I don't know. I mean, if a lot of people are spending a lot of time staying up late to see what that group is doing, but it's a very good pitching staff. The Dodgers, they're kind of weathering some injuries, but they pitched well in that series, most certainly. And then the Red Sox brought the best ERA in baseball, I believe, into this quick 2-game series that the Braves just played at Truist Park. So nothing seemed to be easy and nothing's going to be given, and we already knew that. And that kind of speaks to what the Philadelphia Phillies are doing here, because soft schedule, easier schedule, strength of schedule, whatever you want to talk about, they're doing exactly what they should be doing and winning the series that they should be winning. And we knew, if you needed a reminder, that the Phillies are a very good club and a dangerous club, and now they've taken over first place here in the month of May. We're not going to get lost in the statistics here, but the Braves have somehow gone from one of the top offenses in baseball to a rather middle-of-the-pack team by the traditional numbers at the very least. Now, some of the expected numbers still tell you and show you, and the eye test should also let you know, there are a lot of talented hitters here. The results simply aren't there. A long slump from Matt Olson, the slower start from Ronald Acuna Jr. and Austin Riley, those were the culprits. Then all of a sudden, the rest of the lineup went cold. And I'm going to make a not-so-bold prediction here, Chris, that not only are those 3 stars going to figure it out, but this lineup is bound for a course correction, and I'm thinking that happens sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I mean, we've just seen this group together too long, for these extended struggles. Expected numbers, as you said, are still there. They're hitting the ball hard, not getting a ton of results out of it. I still look at Ronald kind of as the spark plug. I just kind of feel like when he gets rolling, that the rest of this lineup is going to fall right in behind him. Because he's just kind of the table setter and all that. And we've seen some good things from him over the last few at the end of that Dodgers series, and then in the series against Boston. So hopefully that turnaround is coming.
Yeah, and I think that it will be. And we saw some signs from Austin Riley. There were a lot of balls that just seemed to kind of run out of gas on the warning track for him. We're also seeing, I think, some multi-hit games. We saw one of those for Acuna in Los Angeles as well, in addition to a game-tying home run, which was certainly the kind of play that you feel like Ronald Acuna Jr. is capable of, and that we're going to see more of at some point in 2024. One man who has kept the slumping to an absolute minimum is Marcell Ozuna. It might have been a little quieter for him for some of the road trip, but he was able to turn the heat back up by the time that thing was wrapping up. And if this sounds familiar, this whole discussion, it's because we keep having it week after week after week. Ozuna clobbered 2 more home runs on Wednesday, now leads the majors with 12 long balls and 38 runs batted in. We've seen the Marcell Ozuna Renaissance Tour for over a calendar year now, Chris, but this guy just keeps on keeping on, and the Braves have to be very thankful that he has timed it up to do this right now when so many other question marks in the lineup have been looming.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's scary to think about, but look at where they would be probably without Marcell Ozuna, which at the end of last April was something that you and I and a lot of people really thought might be a possibility. So, just an unbelievable turnaround for him. Credit to him because it would have been really easy just to ride it out and not. But he was out there working every single day, and he's seen that the fruits of that come through. It's been amazing. I mean, it just this last homestand, game winning RBI single in the eighth, 2 homers in on Wednesday. It's just he's just an unbelievable hitter right now, and you really can't. It's just really hard to pitch to him. It's whether it's fastballs, breaking balls, whatever it is. I mean, he's squaring it up and coming through in the clutch.
He is. I mean, whether it's a go ahead single that you need or a couple of home runs, nearly had a third on Wednesday as well. His final at bat flew out to the wall in left field. So I mean, this is a guy who's incredibly locked in, and his influence on some other Braves hitters over the course of the last couple of years, just whether it's some insight, whether it's some encouragement, maybe a combination of the two, that is also something he has brought to the table as just a teammate who has gotten universal praise. I asked Brian Snitker about this on the last homestand, and he said, "Look." He has the respect of everyone in that clubhouse. And given what he had to go through, both on the field and off the field, that is quite the turnaround for Marcell Ozuna. Now, if the offense has been a question mark for the Braves, which it most certainly has, the pitching has been the answer during these trying times. The rotation's in a pretty solid place. The bullpen has also been good, but now that group is dealing with some injury issues. First, it was Pierce Johnson, who landed on the 15-day IL with elbow inflammation. Then a couple of days later, same thing for Tyler Matzek. Let's start with Johnson. This issue for both of these guys is not viewed as a major setback, but the club wanted to give Johnson some time to rest and reset. I think at this point in the season, and with a pretty deep bullpen mix that you can draw from and some very successful arms that can kind of step into those leverage situations, you got to play it safe with a pitcher you want around when it counts. Chris, there's just no reason to push this kind of thing in May.
No, and I mean, I think everybody was wondering in that extra inning game why we didn't see Pierce Johnson in Los Angeles, and then we got that answer a day later. So, no, you don't want to push it. I mean, it's still early May. Give him all the time he needs to get right because he's a key piece of that bullpen. Joe Jimenez has been outstanding, but Pierce Johnson from the right hand as a right hander, him and Jimenez both are very important. To the long term success.
Yeah, they definitely are. And a setup option like Joe Jimenez to step in and work instead of Johnson, that's a pretty nice fallback, if you want to call it that. I mean, he was already throwing some pretty important innings, was Joe. And if you want to see something really good, go look at that man's StatCast page. Joe Jimenez has got a lot of red across the board on that thing. He has been, I think, one of the better relievers in the National League, if not all of baseball, here in the early going, and could be primed for a very, very big season for the Atlanta Braves. Now, Matzek also on the 15-day IL for elbow inflammation. His case pretty common among Tommy John recoveries. You start throwing on a regular basis for the first time in a year and a half, there's bound to be some soreness. Giving him some time for rest and treatment, maybe a little break from some of the less than satisfactory results recently, that seems like a pretty good course of action because the Braves are still hopeful that Matzek's going to figure it out. And I still believe the further he gets from the Tommy John and the recovery of it, he's going to pick up a little bit of that lost velocity.
Yeah, because that's the thing that really jumps out right now. He's around 93. It's between 92 and 94 miles per hour on his fastball right now. The last time I looked, and the results haven't been good. He's been hit hard of late. So I think it's almost a positive if his elbow something is bothering him, because he looks he just doesn't look like the same pitcher right now at the moment. So hopefully a 10 or 15-day rest period allow
Mhm.
him to get his feet back under him and make some progress, because again that's a dynamic arm that could be a huge weapon in the postseason. We've seen it in the past. So,
Mhm.
trying to get him back and back to form is big for the Braves.
Yeah, I mean, dynamic arm, important personality in that clubhouse as well. It's just a key part of that bullpen mix. And I think that the Braves would love to give him just that little bit of time right now, to, like I said, with Pierce Johnson, but just in a different context, to reset just a little bit and clearly try to deal with that soreness as it came along. But to reiterate, Brian Snitker has said that for both of these guys, it's not a long term concern with them, but in the short term, they wanted to make the smart play and give both these guys a little bit of time. Now, the Braves called up Ray Kerr, who's a pretty impressive lefty in terms of strikeout stuff and big velocity when Matzek landed on the IL. Jackson Stevens back from Gwinnett for another go-round. It seems like we always run into him at some point during a season. Even with some of the bigger names of this bullpen out, though, Chris, this remains a strong group. The Braves, meanwhile, busy making some other roster moves on the off day. Luis Guillorme traded to the Angels for a player to be named later or cash. Atlanta followed that up with a subsequent move and announced that it acquired fellow infielder Zack from the Boston Red Sox. Neither of these guys, Chris, are going to get much time in the Atlanta infield. We saw that with Guillorme already. Maybe he'll get a little bit more for the Angels. But interesting to see Alex Anthopoulos do some adding and subtracting on an off day to fill the time and give us a little something to talk about.
Yeah, it feels like it's a little bit of shuffling deck chairs, for the bench there as far as backup infielders go. I thought when I saw the Guillorme trade, I thought that was probably opening the door for David Fletcher to come back.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with kicking the tires on Zach Short, who has struggled at the plate. I think he's a pretty good defender, or
Mhm.
versatile defender. It's got a little bit of speed too. So,
Yep.
there's nothing wrong with kicking the tires on him, especially when you've got Fletcher at Gwinnett that you can plug in, anytime you need.
Yeah, I mean, these are just depth moves. And like you said, just kind of doing a little bit of rearranging here. And honestly, when we get to the point where we're talking about the 26th man on the roster, it's probably a slow news day, regardless of it's all the news we have to talk about. Next up for the Braves is a date with the New York Mets for 3 games. Atlanta heads into this series and into the weekend, 2 games back of the Phillies in the National League East, as I mentioned earlier. That's not an altogether shocking development given how hot Philadelphia has been and the Braves' untimely slide with that 1-5 road trip. Mets, meanwhile, started the season 0-5, and you thought, okay, here they go again, because 2023 was a rough year for the New York Mets after 2022 was such a promising step forward for this club. They turned that around, that slow start, with a 12-3 run, but they've had a few ups and downs since then. Their series win over Atlanta, though, that seemed to kind of get their season back on track. Charlie Morton is going to face Jose Quintana in the opener, Max Fried, and Christian Scott on Saturday. It'll be our first look at him. And Bryce Elder will face Luis Severino on Sunday. Chris, the Mets have a more competitive squad this year, and now they've got a few guys that are starting to maybe trend back toward their norms. But the Braves, they need to return the favor for dropping 2 out of 3 last month in order to keep the momentum going that they just grabbed with the quick sweep of the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah, I mean, coming off that road trip, it feels like the Braves need to string together some series wins now. And as you said, they lost the early matchup in Atlanta, and have really performed really well against the Mets over the last few seasons. New York's interesting. I mean, they came to Atlanta struggling offensively. Remember, Brandon Nimmo had that huge series at the plate with
Yep.
a couple of home runs. Pete Alonso's been struggling, but he had a good game in St. Louis at the end of that series, a double and a homer. He was in like a 1 for 29 funk before that, so something to keep an eye on. I think their offense has been really up and down, but I think they've been a little more competitive than a lot of people really thought coming into this season. So credit them for that. But this is a series Braves need to win. They need to take at least 2 out of 3 in this matchup, and keep building that momentum.
Yeah, and bring that series win on home and start a homestand against the Cubs team and then a Padres team that will also give the Braves a different set of challenges. But you're right. I mean, you look at the National League East standings, and yeah, they look a little bit different than maybe some folks had assumed. Braves are not that far out of first place, and clearly there's a lot of baseball left to be played. The Phillies have been, I think, who we expected the Phillies to be, which is a very good club. Mets and Nationals, meanwhile, a little bit more fight in them early in the season. Not surprised by where the Marlins are, and given their recent roster moves, not surprised if they sink a little bit further as they go along. That's going to bring us to the end of this episode of BPTV. As always, make sure you hit that subscribe button right here on the Battery Power YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications. You'll get an alert every time we drop a new episode. Thanks, as always, for riding along with us. We look forward to catching you next time. For Chris Willis, I'm Grant McCauley. Until then, so long, Braves Country.